If we were going to write the complete history of woodworking tools, how long would it take us to get to these? Well, we definitely wouldn't get to them until the last chapter. Maybe we wouldn't even get to them until the last page of the last chapter. Human beings have been working wood for thousands of years. We've had hand planes for at least 2,000 years. Mechanical, adjustable planes like this, about 150 years. I mean, it's hard to remember when you're using a tool like this, but this is not some piece of history steeped in generations of craftsmanship. It's a new invention. It's a product of the industrial age, and it was mass-produced in a factory. What's even crazier is when you think back to the period of really high-class artistic furniture, the Chippendales, the Hepplewhites, stuff like that. Well, those pieces were made using planes like this that look simple and kind of clumsy to the modern eye. But those pieces of furniture, they're still the most sought after, the most expensive. And they were produced by craftsmen who were using, well, basically these. And you have to ask yourself, could we learn to get those same results using these simple tools? Well, obviously, I think the answer is yes, or this would be a very short video. Everybody knows that I love Stanley planes. But if I'm being honest, there isn't very much that you can do with this plane that you can't do with this one. I mean, they're both planes. They're both smoothing planes. And wooden planes have a lot of advantages. They're lighter, they glide over the wood with less friction, and if you drop one on the floor, it probably won't break. The biggest advantage is that compared to metal planes, wooden planes can be very inexpensive. A lot of the people who own these think that they're just junk or decor. They don't realize these are still working tools. So if you live in a place where there are wooden planes, they might be very cheap. If you're just starting in woodwork or just starting with hand tools, maybe you should skip the metallic planes and focus on building up a whole kit of just the wooden ones, because you could save a lot of money and build up a lot of very useful skills in the process. Now, of course, we have to know what to buy and what to do with it. But luckily, wooden planes, just like metal planes, are divided into three easily understood families. The first family of wooden planes is the short ones, and these are mostly smoothing planes. They're little, usually less than 9 inches long, or right around there. They have a very tight mouth, which is made to fight tear out. They typically have a double iron with a chip breaker, and the iron is sharpened mostly straight, but with just a little bit of curvature to it. That keeps it from digging into the work and leaving tracks. The idea with a plane like this is it's the last plane to touch your work. It's short, so it can get into very small areas, little dips in the work. It has a lightly cambered iron, so it won't dig in or leave tracks, and it fights tear out. If you're good at using a plane like this, it's the last thing you have to use, and then you can go straight to applying your finish. Now, if you're in America or the UK, you will mostly encounter this style of plane. It's called a coffin smoother because of its obvious coffin shape. These are traditional. But if you're in France, Germany, or a lot of other European countries, you're actually going to run across this style of plane instead. Now, coming from a US or UK perspective, these can look very weird, but they're not weird at all. They're actually amazing. You have a grip back here, and then this front horn lets you get a really solid grip on the front of the plane. It's not at all like the little knob you find on Stanley planes. You can put a lot of force in here. This equalizes the pushing pressure between your two arms and really cuts down on the strain on that right elbow. So when you see a plane like this, don't dismiss it. These can be extremely valuable. I use them all the time. So everything I've said here sounds very simple. If you get a short plane with a straight, lightly set double iron and a tight mouth, well, that's a smoothing plane, and that's all you have to worry about. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Out of the 7 planes I have here, only these 3 are actually smoothers. all the rest of them do different things. So this one, for instance, is actually referred to as a jack plane. It's German, made by the ECE company, and in the German woodworking tradition, their jack plane and their smoothing plane are either very close in size or they can even be exactly the same. The big difference is that this one has an angle at 45 degrees, which is what we call common pitch, and their smoothing planes have a higher angle, 50 or 55 degree iron. Otherwise, there actually isn't that much difference. You could set this one up as a jack, or you could set it up as a smoother, which is what I do, and I think it's amazing. It's worth mentioning these cost like $130 brand new. You can buy them on Amazon, and I think they're a tremendous value. I'll put a link to these down in the description. If you have one of these, you can use it as a jack or a smoother. It's your choice. If you see it advertised as a jack, just remember that there's more than one thing you can do with it. Now, if you run into a short plane like this one, where the iron is going almost perpendicular, this is probably a toothing plane. And the iron is actually, well, it has teeth. It kind of looks like a comb. And the point of these planes is to leave a textured surface for veneer work, or sometimes to work across really figured grain or a piece of wood with a lot of knots. That toothed iron won't tear up the surface the same way a normal iron will. This is a pretty specialty tool, and I actually never use them in my woodwork. So if you see one like this, just understand that it's not a smoothing plane. You want to think before you buy it. Now, we have a similar thing over here. If you saw a picture of this one from the top or just from the side, you would think, oh, that's a standard coffin smoother. And it is, except notice the bottom. It has a lot of curvature to it. This is actually called a compass plane, and it's made for working the inside curves of things. Now, that sounds handy, but the reality is I never use a plane like this for furniture making. I do my curved work with spoke shaves and scrapers, stuff like that. This is really a specialty plane, and it would have been used by coopers, barrel makers, and other people who did curved work all day long. If you bought one of these wanting it to be a smoother, you'd be out of luck. It won't do that work. Now, the last one I have over here, something else you're going to run into. It's just a continental style plane in the smoothing size, but if you look at the mouth, it's very big, and the iron is narrow and heavily curved. Let me see if I can pull that out. Yeah, you can see there is crazy curvature to this iron. So this is what we call a scrub plane, and it's really exactly the same as the metal scrub plane you see me use in lots of my videos. It's short, it's got a wide mouth and a super curved iron, and it's for hogging off lots of material really fast. This one's a little bit weirder because somebody's actually put an extra piece of wood on the bottom and made the sole curved. This is like a big molding plane. It had some sort of special use, but it obviously started out life as a scrub plane. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if you're in the market for a heavy stock removal tool. These work wonderfully. You just need to be aware that they're out there and make sure you look at the mouth and the iron when you're buying a plane. If you're in the market for a smoothing plane and you end up with a scrub instead, well, you're going to be disappointed because this is a useful tool, but it won't do any smoothing. Our second plane family is the jack and foreplane family, and these are right in the middle at about 16 inches long. These planes are usually set up with a wide mouth and a really big curved iron. So if we look at this one that we restored last week, you can see that mouth is really big and there's a big aggressive camber on that blade. Now, these were usually the first planes to touch the stock, and they're set up this way because their job is to take off high spots, get rid of twist and dimension work, make it thinner or narrower before you bring in other planes. Now, when I'm talking about a really curved iron and a really open mouth, you're probably thinking, wait a second, that sounds an awful lot like a scrub plane. What's the difference? Well, in practice, there really isn't a difference. Both planes hog off a lot of wood really quickly. The scrub plane is a little bit more associated with European cabinet makers, and the wooden jack plane is a little bit more of a British and American thing. But that's a generalization. The point is, both tools do more or less the same thing. If I had to pick one of them, I would take the wooden jack plane because it's got that long sole. So while you're taking off the high spots and dimensioning the work, that extra length is also keeping things flat, which means when I go to my tri-plane to flatten the work, there's usually less work to do. Now, if you're going to buy one of these, the important thing is this can be your most beat up plane because it's doing your least precise work. If you go back to last week's video, we talked about the throat, the wedge, the abutments, the iron, and the chip breaker, and all the things that make a plane work or not work. But as long as a jack plane has those basic things, the rest of it can be pretty much destroyed, and it'll still function. Here's a good example. This was my day-to-day jack plane for years, and if you look at the mouth, you can see it's enormous. I could drive a truck through that thing. It didn't come from the factory like this. This is all wear. And if I put it next to this other plane, well, these were probably about the same height when they were both new. This one's become so much shorter just from being used day after day for decades. And after all that wear, you know what? This thing still works fine. I've gotten a better jack plane, which is what I use now, but if I had to go back to using this one, there's nothing wrong with it. Even though it's really beat up, it's still a completely functional jack plane, and something I really like having in my kit. Our last family of planes is the big ones, the tri- and jointer planes. Now, technically, a triplane is about 22 inches long, and a jointer plane can be a lot longer, even 30 to 36 inches long. But in practical terms, you just need one long plane that can level surfaces and shoot edges, and a triplane is usually plenty for that. I own a bunch of triplanes, and I don't own any enormous jointer planes, and I get by just fine. Now, when you go to pick these out, you have to be pretty discerning. They're pretty similar to a smoothing plane, not really like a jack plane. These planes need to have a tight mouth and a fine, slightly cambered iron with a good chip breaker. These are doing your most accurate work, creating those flat surfaces and those perfect 90-degree edges. And they can't do that if they're all loose and wide-mouthed like a jack plane. You also need this plane to have a good chip breaker that's set close, and it needs to have that fine mouth because one of the things the triplane does is clean up tear out. Sometimes your jack plane is going to really tear up the surface of your work, and as you're leveling it out with the triplane, you also want to take out a lot of those torn fibers. That cuts way down on the amount of smoothing that you need to do. So when you go to pick one of these out, be discerning. Get one that's in good shape or something that you think you can restore pretty easily. It's going to make all of your work a lot easier. The good news is, once you have your smoother, your jack, and your triplane, that's a complete set of wooden planes. You're done. Once you have a basic kit of bench planes, a smoother, a jack, and a triplane, you still need to learn how to set up and adjust your planes. And that does take practice, but it is not complicated. Everything on a wooden plane works through friction, and all the adjustments are made with a mallet or a hammer. So I've got my jack plane right here, and the iron is sticking up above the wedge. If I want more iron sticking out of the mouth of the plane, I just take my hammer and tap the back of the iron a little bit. And that forces it down into the throat and forces a little bit more blade to come out through the mouth. And yep, I can feel a little bit of iron coming out. Now, driving it in that way doesn't usually bother the wedge. So as long as I'm advancing it, I can just leave the wedge alone. But what if I have too much iron? Well, then I need to pull it back. You can hit the body of your plane with a metal hammer, but that's going to mash it up and it won't last nearly as long. For retracting the iron, I recommend a softer mallet, nylon, or this is a rawhide mallet. Doesn't make a huge difference. You can use a wooden one too. To pull the iron back, you're going to tap the plane here on the toe or here on the heel. And that delivers a shock to the plane body. And the plane iron comes back up in the body again because of physics. Now, when you do that, you also loosen the wedge a tiny bit. Anytime you pull the plane iron back, the wedge also comes back. So when you retract it, you need to tighten it again. Just a little tap is plenty. Don't go crazy. So now, I've hit it twice and yeah, there's no iron coming out of the mouth anymore. So it's really simple. Tap on the iron to get more iron. Leave the wedge alone if you're advancing. Tap on the toe or the heel to retract the iron, and always tighten up the wedge again when you're retracting, because the wedge lets go when the iron does. Now we're going to set up this triplane from scratch. Let's say that you've just honed your iron and set your chip breaker, and you're ready to do some work. Put the iron assembly in the plane with the screw down in the slot. Put it in the throat and let it go all the way down until the edge touches the bench. It's not going to hurt anything. Then take the wedge and put it on top of the iron. You'll probably notice it doesn't seat all the way in the plane, but if you grab the iron and pull it up a little bit, the wedge just kind of magically falls into place. Pull the iron up just a little bit more, maybe a 1/16 of an inch, and then set that wedge with firm hand pressure. Give it a tiny hit, with your mallet, and you're ready to check and see where the edge is. The best thing to do is flip the plane over like this so you can sight down the sole. I'm going to hold the plane with my left hand, and I'm going to use my index finger against the wedge like this. That way, if I make a mistake, everything won't come spilling out of the plane. And what I'm going to do now is just sight right down the sole. And I'm looking to see the edge of that blade as just a very thin line coming out of the mouth. You might not be able to see this the first time you do it, but as you practice, it'll make more and more sense. Now I can see that edge, but it's not coming out the throat, and I can also use my thumb just to test. Going across like this, not like this, is completely safe. You're not going to cut yourself. And I can't really feel that edge. So I'm going to give that iron a little tap deeper. Just like that. And then I'll look again, and I can see it, and I can almost feel it. And I've got an edge now. So I'm going to put it on the wood and see what I get. Now I'm edge planing, so I'm going to use a special toe grip, which means I grab the plane between these two fingers and use my other three fingers against the wood as a fence. That lets me control the plane and keep it in the center or shift it to either side if I want to. Without this grip, that kind of control is impossible. Let me try to take a shaving. Okay, I didn't get anything there. So let me deepen that iron a little bit, and I'll give the wedge a quick tap too. Let's try again. There we go. So now I have a shaving, and it's nice, but it's a little bit too light. I can't get work done quickly this way. So I'll advance the iron a little bit more, and I'll give it another shot. And that's good, but it's a tiny bit heavy. I'd like a little bit less. Let me back it off just a little. And then every time you back it off, you also need to tighten the wedge. Just give it a little tap. Don't go crazy. And try it again. That's good. That's about the thickness I'm looking for in a triplane. Now I need to make sure that that blade is adjusted laterally, that it's not sticking up on one corner or the other. So I'll take that toe grip again, I'll put it on the board, and I'll have the plane all the way over to the left, and I'll see if I get a shaving. I get a very light shaving over on the left-hand side. I want the same thing on the right-hand side. Nope, I think that's actually a little bit heavy, and the plane needs a tiny lateral adjustment, which means I'm just going to strike the side of the iron to move it over and get that blade more straight. So right here, where the iron is a little bit tilted, I'll give it a little tap, and then I'll check it. And just by looking visually, I can see the iron is high in the middle, and I can't really see it on either side. Let's give it another shot. Right side. Light shaving. Left side. Light shaving. Middle. Full length, full width shaving. This tool is completely set up, and it's ready to work for hours just the way it is. This took a minute for me to do, but once you've done it a few times, you'll be able to do it much more quickly because you're not going to be also talking to a camera at the same time. When you're using wooden planes, your body mechanics matter a lot. It really matters how you're gripping the plane. So if you're edge jointing, you want to use that toe grip I showed you a minute ago. But what if I were just planing this down to make it a little bit narrower? Well, you put the plane on the work, and then the most obvious, the most comfortable grip is just to lay your front hand over it like this. That's perfectly fine. You'll see me doing that. But I like to look at old illustrations of people doing woodwork, and they grip these planes really differently. They take that thumb and they put it on the other side and they pinch the top of the toe. When you do that, something very weird happens. I drop my thumb behind for that pinch grip, and all of a sudden my wrist really hurts. It feels uncomfortable. So I need to bring my arm up like this. Well, that makes my shoulder feel weird, so I need to rotate my shoulders. That puts tension in my hips, so I have to kick out my back foot, and oh my God, something is completely different. This grip and the stance that it puts you into sort of turns your whole body into this incredible planing machine. Your arm can't bend any further this way. And what it really wants to do is just swing in a straight line like this. That really helps the plane to go straight. Now, I've also got my shoulder and my arm behind the plane, and my forearm is perfectly aligned, so I've got really great force. I've also got my foot behind me and the heel planted firmly. It's like throwing a punch. It starts from the ground and travels through your body to your hand. I have incredible leverage, incredible force when I do things this way, and it's very hard for the plane to go wobbling side to side. As weird as it might look, this grip gives you unbelievable control. Once you practice it, it's probably the only way you're going to want a plane. In this video, I'm saying so many positive things about wooden planes, you might be wondering, hold on, how did metal planes take over and become so popular? Well, they do have a couple of significant advantages. Here's the biggest one. Right now I have this plane set up with no iron sticking out of the mouth, just like I would start with a wooden plane. But instead of tapping or doing any adjusting, I'll put the plane directly on the wood and start planing. Of course, nothing happens, but then I'll start feeding the adjuster, and almost immediately I start to get a little shaving. So I'll keep planing and start feeding that adjuster forward as I go. And after just a couple of strokes, I'm getting a really wonderful shaving. And this plane is perfectly adjusted. No back and forth, no tapping, no messing around. Just feed the iron forward until you have the shaving you want, and stop. This is one of the big reasons metal planes eventually took over for the wooden ones. This video has covered a lot of information, and you might be wondering, okay, how exactly am I going to integrate wooden planes into my woodworking? Well, you can definitely go out and get the entire kit of planes, just like I have here. It'll totally work. But if I'm being completely honest, when I'm doing my own work, when the cameras are off, I really do like wooden planes for the larger ones, like the triplane and the foreplane. Metal planes that are in this larger size, they always feel clunky and too heavy to me. I don't enjoy using them. But I also don't enjoy using coffin smoothing planes. And there's nothing wrong with them, it's just a personal preference thing. I find them difficult to get a good grip on, I can't move them around the way I want to, and the constant tapping back and forth is annoying. I adjust my smoothing plane a lot. So for me, I really like having one metallic plane, like this one. And I think that's what I would recommend to anybody who was getting started in planes and had a little bit of money, but not a ton. Buy one high-quality, adjustable metal plane. Buy the best one you can afford. Go premium if you can. They're wonderful. I suggest you get a number 4 size smoother or a number 5 size jack. It's just personal preference. Once you have a really good metal plane, you can use those to restore your wooden planes, or you can use your metal plane to even make wooden planes from scratch. We've done some of that on this channel, and we're going to do more. I think this combination is really perfect. You get the adjustability and versatility of metal with the easy use, low weight, low maintenance of wooden planes. It's a perfect system, and it's what I choose when I'm just doing work for myself and for my own family. Anyway, after last week's video on restoring and this week's video on using, you should be ready to confidently go out and get yourself some wooden planes. The only thing I don't recommend is buying your first wooden planes on eBay or buying them online from somewhere else. It's actually really important for you to be able to see these and look at them. I own dozens of them. I've restored dozens of them. I almost never buy them online. I pretty much only buy them when I can grab them and touch them and look at them. That's my advice to you, especially when you're first starting out. And hey, if you found this content useful, you can check me out over on Patreon at patreon.com/RexKruger, where you can see all of the rewards, early access, and exclusive content I have just for the people who make these videos possible. I'll be back next week with another great project, and I'm really glad you joined me for this one. Thanks for watching.